The blizzard swallowed the outpost whole, erased it from satellite maps, from radio chatter, from existence itself. Inside a concrete tomb buried in 6 feet of snow, 2 cocky rookies laughed at ghost stories while the woman they mocked loaded her rifle in silence. They didn't know her call sign. They didn't know the body count that followed her shadow. They didn't know that in 12 hours she'd be the only thing standing between them and a mass grave in the mountains. The veterans knew. They always did. But by the time the storm turned the sky black and the enemy came crawling through the whiteout, it was already too late to apologize. If you want to see how this night ends, stay with me until the final word. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Let's begin. The wind didn't howl. It screamed. It tore across the ridge like something alive, something furious, hurling snow and ice against the reinforced windows of Outpost Viper 7 with the kind of violence that made even hardened operators flinch. The structure itself, a low-slung bunker of poured concrete and steel plating, groaned under the assault, its skeleton creaking in protest as the blizzard tried to pry it open like a tin can. Inside, the world was smaller, colder, meaner. A single overhead light flickered, casting jagged shadows across the cramped interior. The air smelled like gun oil, stale coffee, and wet wool. A rattling space heater in the corner fought a losing battle against the cold, seeping through every crack, every rivet, every breath of wind that found its way inside. Frost clung to the edges of the window frames. Condensation dripped from the ceiling in slow, irregular beats. And in that frozen pocket of misery, 6 soldiers waited. Ensign Mason Reed sat on an ammo crate near the heater, his boots unlaced, his rifle propped carelessly against the wall. He was 23, broad-shouldered, and still young enough to think confidence and competence were the same thing. His face was all sharp angles, strong jaw, narrow eyes, the kind of look that made people either trust him immediately or distrust him on instinct. Right now, he was grinning. "I'm just saying," Mason drawled, leaning back with his hands behind his head, "if she's supposed to be some kind of legend, maybe she could, I don't know, say something. Acknowledge the rest of us exist." Across from him, Petty Officer Kyle Brenner snorted into his coffee mug. Brenner was wiry, freckled, with the kind of nervous energy that made him fidget even when he was sitting still. He had a reputation for 2 things, cracking jokes under pressure and never shutting up. "Maybe she's mute," Brenner offered, smirking. "Or maybe she just doesn't like you." "Nobody likes him," muttered Petty Officer Sam Ortiz from the corner. Ortiz was the team medic, compact, dark-haired, with steady hands and the kind of calm that only came from seeing too much blood. He didn't look up from the medical kit he was restocking, but his tone carried the weight of someone who'd had this conversation before. Mason ignored him. "I'm serious. We've been stuck in this icebox for 18 hours, and she hasn't said more than 10 words total. What's the deal? Is she shy? Is it a vow of silence? Is she waiting for a drum roll?" "She's waiting for you to shut up," said Lieutenant Adrian Cole. The words landed like a hammer. Cole didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He was leaning against the far wall, arms crossed, his face half hidden in shadow. At 31, he was the oldest person in the room and the only one who'd seen combat on 3 continents. His eyes were flat, dark, and tired, the kind of tired that didn't go away with sleep. Mason's grin faltered. "You're running your mouth because you're nervous," Cole said evenly. "And you should be. This isn't a training op. The satellites are down, the weather's only getting worse. And if something happens tonight, that woman in the corner is going to save your life." Mason glanced toward the shadows. She was sitting on the floor in the farthest corner of the bunker, her back against the wall, her legs crossed. Her hands moved in slow, methodical rhythm, disassembling, cleaning, and reassembling her rifle with the kind of precision that didn't require thought. She didn't look up, didn't acknowledge the conversation, didn't seem to care. Captain Rowan Vale. She was small, maybe 5'6", lean and compact in a way that made her easy to overlook in a crowded room. Her hair was dark, pulled back tight. Her face was angular, sharp-featured, with pale skin that looked like it hadn't seen sunlight in months. Her eyes were gray. Not blue-gray or green-gray, just gray, cold, empty, the kind of eyes that didn't blink when they needed to pull a trigger. She wore the same gear as everyone else. Tactical fatigues, plate carrier, sidearm on her thigh. But somehow it looked different on her. Worn in, lived in, like the uniform had molded itself to her body over years of use. Mason had met her exactly once, 6 hours ago, when the transport dropped her off at the outpost without explanation. No briefing, no introduction, just a nod from the pilot and a duffel bag tossed onto the snow. She'd walked inside, found a corner, and hadn't moved since. "Steel Wraith," Brenner muttered, shaking his head. "That's what they call her, right?" "That's the call sign," said Chief Logan Pierce. Pierce was the 6th member of the team, a massive slab of muscle and scar tissue who looked like he'd been carved out of granite. He was 42, a career Navy SEAL with a chest full of medals he never talked about and a voice like gravel in a blender. He sat near the door, cleaning his sidearm with the same quiet focus as Rowan. "Heard she got it in Syria," Brenner said, lowering his voice like he was telling a ghost story. 12-hour firefight, pinned down in some blown-out factory. Entire platoon dead except her. She held the building alone until extraction. 60 confirmed kills. They say she didn't miss once. "Bullshit," Mason said flatly. "It's not," Cole said. Mason blinked. "You're serious?" "I was there," Cole said quietly. "Different unit, same city. We heard the radio chatter, heard her voice. She didn't sound scared, didn't sound angry, just calm, like she was reading a grocery list. Every time she called a target, someone died." The bunker went quiet. Outside, the wind surged, rattling the metal door in its frame. Mason swallowed. "So what's she doing here? This is a backwater observation post. We're babysitting sensor grids and weather stations. Why send a legend to the middle of nowhere?" "Because Command knows something we don't," Pierce said. He didn't look up. "And when they send someone like her to babysit, it usually means someone's about to knock on the door." "Great," Brenner muttered. "That's not ominous at all." Ortiz finally looked up from his kit. "You two want some advice? Stop talking about her like she's not in the room. Show some respect." "I'm not disrespecting." "You are," Ortiz said flatly. "You're treating her like a circus act. She's a captain. She's got more combat time than all of us combined. And if the chief's right, we're going to need her before the storm breaks." Mason opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. Because deep down, under the bravado and the nerves, he knew Ortiz was right. The radio on the desk crackled to life. Everyone froze. The voice that came through was clipped, distant, buried under layers of static. "Viper 7, this is Command Actual. Acknowledge." Cole crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed the handset. "Command Actual, Viper 7. Go ahead." "Be advised, SATCOM is experiencing widespread disruption due to solar activity and weather interference. All aerial assets are grounded until further notice. You are the only operational observation post in your sector. Maintain defensive posture and report any movement. Acknowledge." Cole's jaw tightened. "Copy, Command. Defensive posture maintained. Request timeline for satellite restoration. Unknown at this time. Estimate 6 to 12 hours minimum. Command Actual, out." The radio went silent. Cole hung the handset back on the cradle and turned to face the team. His expression was stone. "You heard it. We're blind. No eyes in the sky. No air support. No backup." "For 12 hours?" Brenner said, his voice pitching higher. "We're supposed to just sit here and hope nobody decides to pay us a visit?" "We're not hoping," Pierce said. He stood, rolling his shoulders. "We're preparing. Cole, I want overlapping fields of fire on every approach. Brenner, get on the perimeter sensors. Make sure they're still functional. Ortiz, prep your trauma kit. Mason, I'll check the ammo," Mason said quickly. Pierce nodded. "Good. Move." The team scattered, each person falling into their role with the kind of muscle memory that came from months of training and years of experience. The bunker transformed from a waiting room into a fighting position in under 5 minutes. Mason hauled crates of ammunition from the storage locker, counting magazines, checking loads, organizing them by position. His hands moved fast, but his mind was somewhere else. He kept glancing toward the corner. Rowan hadn't moved, hadn't reacted to the radio, hadn't acknowledged the shift in the room's energy. She just kept cleaning her rifle, slow and steady, like the world outside didn't exist. Mason didn't understand it. How could someone be that calm, that detached? Didn't she feel the weight of the situation? Didn't she realize they were alone in the mountains with no backup, And a storm that could bury them alive? Or maybe she did realize it. Maybe she'd been in worse. The thought made Mason's stomach twist. He finished stacking the ammo and crossed the room, his pride warring with something that might have been common sense. He stopped a few feet away from her corner and cleared his throat. "Ma'am?" She didn't look up. "Captain Vale?" Her hands paused, just for a second. Then she slid the bolt back into place, chambered around, and finally raised her eyes. The weight of that gaze nearly knocked him backward. "Ma'am, Mason's voice cracked. He cleared his throat again. "I wanted to apologize. For earlier. I didn't mean any disrespect. I was just nervous. Talking without thinking." Rowan studied him. Her expression didn't change, didn't soften, didn't harden. It was just neutral. Empty. Like she was deciding whether he was worth the effort of a response. Then she spoke. "Save it." Her voice was rough, low, like she hadn't used it in days. Maybe she hadn't. "You'll need your focus," she added, "not your apologies." 4 words. A full shutdown. Mason nodded quickly, heat rising in his face. "Yes, ma'am." He turned and walked away before he could embarrass himself further. Behind him, Rowan returned to her rifle. The hours crawled. The storm outside intensified, the wind rising from a scream to a roar that shook the bunker's foundation. Snow piled against the windows in drifts, blocking out what little light remained. The temperature inside dropped another 5 degrees. The heater gave up entirely around 2,100 hours, leaving the team huddled in their cold weather gear, breath misting in the air. Brenner managed to get the perimeter sensors online, but the readings were chaos. The wind triggered false positives every few minutes. Phantom movement, ghost signatures, interference from the storm itself. "This is useless," Brenner muttered, staring at the laptop screen. "I can't tell if we're being surrounded or if it's just the weather." "Assume both," Pierce said. He was sitting by the door, his rifle across his lap, his eyes half closed. But Mason knew better. Pierce wasn't sleeping. He was listening. Cole paced the length of the bunker, checking sight lines, adjusting the firing positions, running through contingencies in his head. He moved like a man who'd done this 1,000 times before and survived every one. Ortiz sat near the medical supplies, his hands folded, his eyes distant. Mason didn't know what the medic was thinking, but he'd seen that look before. It was the look of someone preparing to see blood, and in the corner, Rowan remained perfectly still. Mason found himself watching her more than he should have. She didn't fidget, didn't check her watch, didn't pace or stretch or make small talk. She just existed, a statue in fatigues, a ghost in the corner. It was unnerving. At 22:30 hours, the radio crackled again. This time, the static was worse, thick, distorted, barely intelligible. Viper 7, command, interference, hostile, sector. Cole lunged for the handset. "Command, say again, you're breaking up." "Movement detected, thermal, unknown, advised." "Command, repeat. What movement? Where?" The radio shrieked with feedback, then went silent. Cole slammed the handset down. "Brenner, anything on the sensors?" Brenner's fingers flew across the keyboard. His face went pale. Yeah, I've got... Shit. I've got multiple contacts. North Ridge, maybe a click out." "How many?" "I don't know. The storm's screwing with the readings. Could be 10, could be 20. "Could be a glitch," Mason said, his voice tight. "Could be," Pierce said, "but we're not betting on it. Positions, now." The team moved. Mason grabbed his rifle and took his assigned spot near the west-facing window, his heart hammering in his chest. He flicked the safety off, pressed his eye to the scope, and tried to see through the swirling wall of white outside. Nothing. Just snow. Just wind. Just darkness. "Contact discipline," Cole said sharply. "No one fires unless I give the order or you have a confirmed threat. Understood?" A chorus of affirmatives. Mason's hands were shaking. He gripped the rifle tighter, trying to steady himself, trying to remember his training. Breathe, focus, acquire, engage. Across the room, Rowan stood. She didn't rush, didn't grab her rifle in a panic. She just rose to her feet in one smooth motion, slung her weapon across her back, and walked to the center of the bunker. "Captain," Cole said. Rowan didn't answer. She was staring at the north window, her head tilted slightly, like she was listening to something the rest of them couldn't hear. Then she crossed to the door. "Wait," Cole said, stepping in front of her. "Where are you going?" Rowan looked at him, just looked, and something in that gaze made Cole step aside. "There's a ridge," Rowan said quietly. 300 meters north, clear sight line to the approaches. Elevated, defensible. "That ridge is exposed," Cole said. "You'll be in the open, no cover. The wind alone could kill you." "I know." "Then why?" "Because that's where I'll hunt," Rowan said. She zipped her parka, pulled her hood up, and opened the door. The storm roared inside, a wall of freezing air and snow that sucked the heat from the room in seconds. Mason felt it hit his face like a slap, burning his eyes, stealing his breath. Rowan stepped into the whiteout without hesitation. The door slammed shut behind her. The bunker felt emptier the moment she vanished. Pierce was the first to speak. "She's insane." "No," Cole said quietly. "She's done this before." "Done what?" Brenner asked. "Frozen to death?" "One," Cole said. Mason pressed his face back to the scope, scanning the ridge where Rowan had gone. He couldn't see her. Couldn't see anything. She disappeared into the storm like smoke. His radio crackled. Rowan's voice came through, flat, calm, emotionless. "Viper 7, Steel Wraith. I'm in position. Stand by." "Copy," Cole said. He looked at the rest of the team. "She's our eyes now. Whatever she calls, we trust it. Clear?" Mason nodded, his throat dry. Minutes passed, then 10, then 20. The storm howled. The bunker creaked. The team waited. And then, "Movement," Rowan said. "One click. Northeast approach. Formation." Cole's voice snapped through the radio. "How many?" 12, maybe 15. Staggered line, moving slow, deliberate. "They know we're here," Pierce muttered. "Weapons free on my mark," Cole said. "Wraith, you have the shot?" There was a pause, a long, agonizing pause. And then Rowan's voice, cold and final. "Target acquired." The crack of her rifle cut through the storm like thunder. The sound hung in the air for half a second, sharp, clean, final, before the wind swallowed it whole. Mason's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't see the target, couldn't see Rowan, couldn't see anything beyond the swirling curtain of white that pressed against the window like it was trying to smother the world. But he heard her voice on the radio, calm as dead water. "One down." Cole's response was immediate. "Confirm." "Confirmed. Target eliminated. 14 remaining. They're scattering." Mason felt his pulse spike. 14. Jesus Christ. 14 hostiles out there in the storm, and they just watched their point man's head explode without knowing where the shot came from. "They're going to ground," Rowan continued, her voice as steady as if she were reading a weather report. "Northeast quadrant, using the terrain. They'll try to flank." "How long do we have?" Cole asked. 3 minutes, maybe 4. Pierce swore under his breath. "That's not enough time to reinforce the east side." "Then we don't reinforce," Cole said. "We funnel them. Brenner, kill the exterior lights on the east approach. Make them think we're blind. Ortiz, move your kit to the center. If someone goes down, I want you mobile. Mason, keep your sector clear. If anything moves on the west side, you drop it." "Copy," Mason said, his voice tight. He pressed his eye back to the scope, scanning the white void beyond the glass. His finger rested on the trigger guard, not quite touching, not quite safe. Every muscle in his body was coiled like a spring. The wind screamed, the bunker groaned, and somewhere out in that frozen hell, Rowan was hunting. 2 minutes passed like hours. Mason's world narrowed to the circle of his scope, a 10-meter slice of visibility in an ocean of nothing. He tracked movement that wasn't there, shadows that turned out to be snow, shapes that dissolved the moment he blinked. His hands were sweating inside his gloves. The radio crackled. "Contact," Rowan said. 200 meters, 3 targets, moving in a wedge. Another crack split the storm. "2 down," she said, her tone unchanged. "Third broke left, lost visual." "Where?" Cole demanded. East approach. He's yours now. Cole moved to the east window, his rifle already shouldered. Brenner killed the lights like he'd been told, plunging that side of the bunker into darkness. The only illumination came from the faint green glow of the laptop screen and the flickering overhead light that cast long, jittering shadows across the floor. Mason could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. Thump, 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 thump. Bump, 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 bump. Viper 7, be advised, Rowan's voice cut through again. They're regrouping. I count 9 hostiles. They know where I am now, suppressing fire inbound. As if on cue, the distant chatter of automatic weapons echoed through the storm, muffled, distorted, but unmistakable. Tracers arced through the darkness like angry fireflies, swallowed almost instantly by the blizzard. Wraith, fall back, Cole ordered. You're exposed. Negative, Rowan said. I have the high ground. They don't. Another shot. Another voice. 8. Mason's jaw clenched. She wasn't retreating. She wasn't even hesitating. She was up there in the open, in the wind, in the freezing death of the storm, picking them off one by one like it was the easiest thing in the world. Brenner's voice cracked through the tension. I've got movement on the sensors, east side, 50 meters and closing. I see him, Cole said. Mason risked a glance away from his scope. Cole was a statue at the east window, his breathing slow and controlled, his rifle perfectly still. He waited. 1 second, 2, 3. Then he fired. The muzzle flash lit up the interior of the bunker for a fraction of a second, bright enough to burn after-images into Mason's vision. Outside, something heavy hit the snow. Tango down, Cole said quietly. Good kill, Pierce said from his position near the door. But they're learning. They're not going to keep walking into our scopes. They don't have to, Rowan's voice said. They just have to wait for me to freeze. It was the first hint of something close to humor Mason had heard from her. Dark, grim, but there. How long can you hold that position? Cole asked. There was a pause. When Rowan spoke again, her voice was quieter, flatter. Long enough. That wasn't an answer. That was a countdown. Mason swallowed hard and forced his attention back to his sector. West side. Clear. Still clear. Nothing moving except the snow and the wind and the creeping dread that crawled up his spine like ice water. Movement, Brenner said suddenly. South side, 2 contacts. They're trying to circle around. Mason, shift to south window, Pierce ordered. I'll cover west. Mason didn't think. He just moved. He grabbed his rifle, abandoned his post, and sprinted to the south-facing window in 3 long strides. He dropped into a crouch, brought the scope to his eye, and scanned the storm. There. 2 shapes, barely visible through the swirling white. They moved low and fast, using the terrain, staying in the dead zones where the wind piled snow into drifts tall enough to hide a man. Mason's finger found the trigger. I've got them, he said. Wait for my mark, Cole said. Let them commit. Mason's pulse hammered. The shapes moved closer. 40 meters, 30, 25. Now, Cole said. Mason fired. The rifle kicked into his shoulder, the sound deafening in the confined space. He didn't wait to see if he'd hit. He shifted, acquired the second target, and fired again. Both shapes dropped. Target's down, Mason said, his voice shaking. Confirm, Cole snapped. Mason kept his scope trained on the bodies. Neither one moved. The snow was already beginning to cover them, erasing the evidence like the mountain itself was ashamed. Confirmed, Mason said. Pierce grunted. Not bad, kid. Mason didn't feel proud. He felt sick. Rowan's voice cut back in. 6 remaining. They're pulling back, regrouping at the tree line, 250 meters northeast. Can you reach them? Cole asked. Not with this wind. They're smart. They know my effective range. So they're going to sit and wait, Pierce said grimly. Wait for us to run out of ammo. Wait for the storm to break. Wait for reinforcements we don't have. Or wait for Wraith to come down off that ridge, Cole said, which she's going to have to do eventually. Negative, Rowan said. I'm not coming down. Captain, you've been out there for over an hour. Your core temp has to be... I know what my core temp is, Rowan said, and for the first time there was an edge in her voice. Sharp, cold. I'm staying in position. They move, I kill them. Simple. Cole's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. You didn't argue with someone like Rowan Vale. You either trusted her or you didn't. The team settled back into their positions, waiting, watching, listening to the wind tear itself apart against the bunker walls. Mason's adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion that made his limbs feel like lead. He wanted to sit down, wanted to close his eyes, wanted to be anywhere but here. But he didn't move, because out there, in the frozen dark, Rowan was still standing. The minutes bled into each other, stretching time into something formless and heavy. Mason's world became the scope, the trigger, the sound of his own breathing inside his parka hood. His fingers ached from gripping the rifle. His shoulders burned from holding position. His eyes watered from staring into the storm. Brenner broke the silence first. This is insane. We're just sitting here, waiting for them to make a move. That's the job, Pierce said. The job is observation, sensor monitoring. We're not supposed to be fighting off an assault. Plans change, Cole said flatly. Adapt or die. Brenner opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He turned back to his laptop, his hands trembling slightly as he typed. Ortiz sat cross-legged near his medical kit, his expression distant. Mason caught his eye for a second, and the medic gave him a small nod. Not reassurance, just acknowledgement. We're still here, still breathing, for now. The radio hissed. Viper 7, Steel Wraith. I have movement. They're splitting up. 3 heading east, 3 heading west. Pincer formation. Shit, Cole muttered. They're going to hit us from both sides at once. Can you take them? Pierce asked. Not all of them, Rowan said. Not before they reach effective range. You're going to have to hold the west flank on your own. Copy that, Pierce said. He shifted to the west window, his massive frame blocking most of the light. Mason, stay on south. Brenner, watch the sensors. Cole, take east with me. Ortiz, stay central and pray we don't need you. Always do, Ortiz muttered. Mason's heart rate spiked again. His hands found their grip on the rifle, muscle memory taking over. He forced himself to breathe, slow, steady. In through the nose, out through the mouth. He could do this. He'd trained for this. Hundreds of hours on the range, dozens of simulations. He knew how to shoot, knew how to kill, but knowing and doing were different things. The radio crackled. East flank 200 meters, Rowan said. 3 targets. Advancing in a staggered line. Engaging. Her rifle cracked once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. 2 down. 3rd is hit but mobile, heading for cover. I've got him, Cole said. He fired. A pause. Tango down. West flank, Rowan continued, her voice never rising, never faltering. 150 meters. They're using smoke. I can't get a clean shot. How close? Pierce asked. Close enough. Then we hold the line, Pierce said. Mason, if they breach the perimeter, you light them up. No hesitation. Understood? Understood, Mason said. The smoke grenades detonated somewhere out in the storm. Dull thumps followed by billowing clouds of gray that mixed with the white and turned the world into a fever dream of swirling chaos. Mason couldn't see anything, couldn't track movement, couldn't acquire a target. His finger hovered over the trigger, ready to fire at shadows. Contact! Pierce roared. Muzzle flashes erupted from the smoke, bright, angry bursts of light that illuminated the falling snow in jagged stop-motion frames. Pierce returned fire, his rifle barking in controlled bursts, each shot deliberate and devastating. Mason swung his scope toward the chaos, trying to find a target, trying to help, but the smoke and snow made it impossible. He saw shapes, movement, but nothing solid, nothing he could shoot without risking hitting Pierce. Brenner, I need eyes, Cole shouted. Sensors are blind, Brenner yelled back. The smoke's screwing with the thermals. A figure burst out of the smoke, sprinting toward the bunker's west side. Pierce tracked it, fired, missed. The figure dropped into a crouch behind a snowdrift 20 meters out. Too close. Way too close. He's got a launcher, Pierce shouted. Mason's blood turned to ice. The figure rose, something long and tubular braced against his shoulder. The business end pointed directly at the bunker. Pierce fired again. The round caught the hostile in the shoulder, spinning him, but not dropping him. The man staggered, recovered, adjusted his aim, and Rowan's rifle cracked from the ridge. The hostile's head snapped back. He collapsed into the snow, the launcher tumbling from his grip. "Threat neutralized," Rowan said, her voice as calm as ever. "West flank is clear." Pierce exhaled hard, lowering his rifle. "Wraith, you just saved our asses." "Noted," Rowan said, "but we're not done. I've got one more hostile. He's retreating, northeast, fast." "Let him run," Cole said. "We've thinned their numbers enough. They'll regroup and reassess." "They'll call for backup," Pierce said grimly. "Maybe. But that takes time. And time is something they don't have much of." Mason finally allowed himself to lower his rifle. His arms were shaking. His legs felt like jelly. He slumped against the wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He'd fired his weapon, killed 2 men, watched others die. And somehow, impossibly, he was still alive. Brenner was staring at his laptop screen, his face pale. "Jesus Christ, that was close. That was too close." "That was the warm-up," Pierce said. He ejected his magazine, checked the round count, and slapped in a fresh one. "They probed us, tested our defenses. Next time, they'll come harder." "Next time?" Brenner said, his voice cracking. "How many more times are we supposed to do this?" "As many as it takes," Cole said. He crossed to the radio and keyed the handset. "Command actual, Viper 7. We are under attack. Multiple hostiles engaged. Request immediate air support. Over." Static. Cole tried again. "Command actual, Viper 7. Do you copy? Over." More static. He slammed the handset down. "We're cut off." "The storm?" Ortiz asked. "The storm, the interference, maybe both." Cole dragged a hand down his face. "We're on our own." Mason felt the weight of those words settle over the bunker like a shroud. No backup, no extraction, no cavalry coming over the hill, just 6 soldiers and a storm that wanted them dead. The radio crackled one more time. "Viper 7, Steel Wraith, I'm coming in." The door burst open and the storm followed Rowan inside like a living thing. Wind howled through the gap, hurling snow across the floor, extinguishing the heater's dying embers. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in an instant. Rowan stepped through and Cole slammed the door shut behind her, throwing the bolt. She stood in the center of the room, coated head to toe in ice. Her parka was white with frost. Her hood was crusted with snow. Her face was pale, too pale. Her lips tinged faintly blue, but her eyes were still sharp, still cold, still gray. Ortiz moved immediately, crossing to her with his kit. "Sit down, now." Rowan didn't argue. She let him guide her to a crate near the heater's corpse and sank onto it with the slow, careful movements of someone whose muscles were on the edge of failure. Ortiz peeled off her gloves. Her fingers were white, bloodless. He swore under his breath and started rubbing them, forcing circulation back into the tissue. "How long were you out there?" Ortiz demanded. "Long enough," Rowan said. "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you're getting." Ortiz shot her a look but didn't push. He wrapped her hands in thermal packs, then moved to check her feet. "You're hypothermic. Stage 1, maybe stage 2. You need to warm up slowly. If you spike your core temp too fast, you'll go into shock." "I know," Rowan said. Her voice was hoarse now, rougher than before. "I've done this before." "That doesn't make it smart," Ortiz said. Pierce handed her a canteen. "Drink, small sips." Rowan took it, her hands shaking slightly as she raised it to her lips. She drank, swallowed, breathed. Mason stood across the room, watching. He didn't know what to say, didn't know what to feel. Part of him wanted to thank her. Part of him wanted to yell at her for taking such a stupid risk. Part of him just wanted to understand how someone could do what she'd just done and still look so utterly unfazed. Cole crouched in front of her, his expression hard. "You held that ridge for over an hour in sub-zero temps, with wind strong enough to knock a man off his feet. You took out, what, 9 hostiles? 10? 11, Rowan said quietly. 11, Cole repeated. 11 confirmed kills in conditions that would have killed most operators in 20 minutes. You want to tell me how the hell you're still conscious?" Rowan met his gaze. "Training." "Bullshit," Cole said, but there was no heat in it, just exhaustion. "No amount of training prepares you for that." Then I got lucky, Rowan said. Also bullshit. Rowan almost smiled. Almost. Believe what you want, Lieutenant. I did my job. That's all that matters. Cole stared at her for a long moment, then stood. Yeah, you did, and you saved our lives doing it. He turned to the rest of the team. Everyone still breathing? A round of tired affirmatives. Good. Then here's the situation. We're cut off from command, no comms. No air support. No backup. The hostiles took heavy losses, but they're not gone. They'll regroup, and when they do, they'll come back harder. Our best case scenario is that the storm breaks by dawn and we can signal for extraction. Worst case, we're here for another 12 hours. And if they hit us again before then? Brenner asked. Then we hold, Cole said simply. We've got ammo. We've got position. We've got each other. That's enough. Mason wanted to believe him. He really did. But deep down, he knew the truth. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. The team fell into a tense routine. Cole set a rotation, 2 on watch, 4 resting, switching every hour. No one slept. No one could. They just sat in the cold and the dark, listening to the storm, waiting for the next wave. Rowan stayed near the center of the bunker, wrapped in a thermal blanket, her rifle across her lap. Ortiz checked her vitals every 20 minutes, monitoring her temperature, her pulse, her respiratory rate. She tolerated it without complaint, but Mason could see the frustration in her eyes. She didn't like being grounded. Didn't like being the patient instead of the operator. Pierce and Cole took the first watch. Brenner huddled over his laptop, trying and failing to reestablish comms. Mason sat against the wall, staring at nothing, his mind replaying the firefight over and over. The sound of the rifle, the kick against his shoulder, the way the targets dropped. He'd killed 2 people tonight. 2 human beings who'd woken up this morning with plans, with families, with lives. And now they were just bodies in the snow. Mason's stomach churned. He swallowed hard, forcing the bile back down. First time? Ortiz asked quietly. Mason looked up. The medic was sitting a few feet away, his expression neutral. What? First time pulling the trigger on a live target, Ortiz said. I can see it on your face. Mason's jaw tightened. Yeah, first time. Ortiz nodded slowly. It doesn't get easier. Anyone who tells you it does is lying, but it does get different. You learn to compartmentalize, file it away, deal with it later. And if I don't want to deal with it later? Mason asked. Then it deals with you, Ortiz said simply. One way or another. Mason didn't have a response to that. Across the room, Rowan's eyes opened. She'd been resting, not sleeping, just resting, but now she was watching him, studying him with that same unreadable expression she always wore. Mason met her gaze and held it. You did good out there, Rowan said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried through the bunker like a bell. Mason blinked. What? You didn't freeze, didn't panic. You took the shot when it mattered. Rowan paused, then added, That's more than most rookies can say. It wasn't praise, not really, but coming from her it felt like a medal. Thank you, ma'am, Mason said. Rowan's eyes drifted back to the ceiling. Don't thank me yet. The night's not over. And as if summoned by her words, the radio crackled to life one more time. But this time, the voice that came through wasn't command. It was something else. Something cold, distorted, artificial. Viper 7. We know you're listening. This is your only warning. Surrender, or we bury you with the storm. The transmission cut off, leaving only static in its wake. The bunker went dead silent. Mason's heart stopped. Pierce stood slowly, his hand drifting to his sidearm. That wasn't a bluff. No, Cole said, his voice like iron. It wasn't. Rowan sat up, the thermal blanket falling away. Her face was still pale, but her eyes were sharp again, focused, lethal. They're not waiting for dawn, she said. They're coming now. The silence that followed the transmission was absolute. Not the quiet of peace, but the suffocating hush before an avalanche. The kind of silence where even breathing felt too loud, too dangerous, too much like surrender. Mason's hands locked around his rifle. His eyes darted to the windows, searching the storm for movement, for shadows, for anything that would give him a target to shoot at instead of this formless dread crawling up his spine. Cole broke first. Positions, now! The team scattered like shrapnel. Pierce slammed himself against the east window, his rifle already up. Brenner abandoned his useless laptop and grabbed his weapon with shaking hands. Ortiz moved his medical kit to the corner, far enough from the windows to avoid direct fire, close enough to reach anyone who went down. Mason took the south window again, his scope pressed to his eye, his world narrowing to that small circle of white chaos beyond the glass. And Rowan stood. The thermal blanket fell away from her shoulders like a discarded shroud. She crossed to her rifle in 3 steps, checked the chamber with practiced efficiency, and slung it across her back. Then she moved to the center of the bunker and just stopped. She stood perfectly still, head tilted slightly, eyes half closed, like she was listening to something only she could hear. "Captain?" Cole said, his voice tight. Rowan didn't answer. "Wraith, where ye come?" Cole tried again. "Oh, we need you on a window." "No," Rowan said quietly. "You don't." Cole turned, frustration flashing across his face. "With all due respect, ma'am, this isn't the time for They're not coming through the windows," Rowan said. Her eyes snapped open, gray and cold, and suddenly, terrifyingly focused. "They're coming through the floor!" The words hung in the air for a fraction of a second. Then the world exploded. The detonation came from below, a massive, earth-shaking blast that tore through the bunker's foundation like a fist through paper. The floor buckled. The walls screamed. The overhead light shattered, plunging the room into darkness, broken only by the emergency lighting that flickered to life in sickly red. Mason was thrown sideways, his rifle clattering from his grip. He hit the wall hard enough to knock the air from his lungs, his vision swimming with stars. Dust and debris filled the air, choking, blinding, turning everything into a nightmare of smoke and chaos. Someone was screaming. No, multiple people were screaming. Mason forced himself to his knees, coughing, gasping, trying to orient himself in the madness. The floor beneath him was cracked, tilted at a wrong angle. A section near the center had collapsed entirely, revealing a jagged hole that dropped into darkness below. And from that darkness, shapes were rising. Hostiles, 4 of them, maybe 5, climbing up through the breach with weapons raised, moving fast, moving silent, moving like they'd done this 100 times before. "Contact!" Pierce roared. He fired from his position, the muzzle flash painting the room in strobe light horror. One of the hostiles dropped, the others scattered, using the debris for cover, returning fire in short, controlled bursts. Mason scrambled for his rifle, his hands fumbling, his ears ringing so badly he could barely hear his own thoughts. He found the weapon, brought it up, tried to aim. A hostile appeared in front of him, materializing from the smoke like a ghost. Mason's training took over. He didn't think, didn't hesitate. He just fired. The hostile went down hard, his weapon skittering across the fractured floor. "Mason, left side!" Cole's voice cut through the chaos. Mason spun. Another hostile. He fired again, missed. The hostile returned fire, and Mason felt the air split next to his head as the round passed close enough to kiss his cheek. He dropped, rolled, came up firing. This time he didn't miss. The hostile collapsed. Mason's breath came in ragged gasps. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the rifle steady. He wanted to scream, wanted to run, wanted to wake up from this nightmare and find himself back in training. Safe, whole, alive. But there was no waking up. There was only the fight. Across the room, Brenner was pinned behind an overturned crate, firing blind, panic written across his face in bold letters. Ortiz had his sidearm out, covering the medic's corner with steady hands and steadier nerves. And Rowan moved like death itself. She didn't take cover, didn't flinch when rounds cracked past her head. She just walked forward into the center of the chaos with her rifle raised, her movements smooth and deliberate, and started killing. One hostile tried to flank Pierce. Rowan shot him through the throat. Another popped up from behind the debris pile. Rowan put 2 rounds in his chest before he could aim. A third fired at her from point-blank range, somehow missed, and Rowan closed the distance in a heartbeat, slamming the butt of her rifle into his face with enough force to shatter bone. He went down, and she shot him twice more to make sure. It wasn't combat, it was execution. Mason stared, his breath caught somewhere between his lungs and his throat, as Rowan systematically dismantled the enemy assault with the cold precision of a machine built for one purpose. "Breach secured," Pierce shouted. "4 hostiles down. Brenner, check for more." Brenner crawled to the edge of the hole, his rifle trained downward into the darkness. "I don't see... Wait. There's..." The explosion came from above this time. The roof detonated in a shower of concrete and rebar, and suddenly the storm was inside, wind and snow pouring through the gaping wound like the mountain itself had decided to reclaim what was theirs. And through that wound, rappelling down on fast ropes, came 6 more hostiles. "Roof breach," Cole screamed. "Suppressing fire, now!" The bunker erupted into a hellscape of muzzle flashes and screaming wind and bullets that tore through the air so thick Mason could feel them vibrate in his bones. He fired at the rappelling figures, trying to track them as they descended, but the wind threw off his aim, the smoke blinded him, and everything was moving too fast, too chaotic, too wrong. One hostile hit the floor and immediately opened fire on Brenner's position. The petty officer scrambled backward, his rifle jammed, his eyes wide with terror. Mason swung his weapon around, lined up the shot, but Rowan was faster. She moved across the bunker in a blur, closing the distance to the hostile before he could adjust his aim. Her rifle came up. One shot. The hostile's head snapped back, but she didn't stop. She transitioned to her sidearm mid-stride, drawing it with her left hand while her right hand dropped her rifle on its sling. Another hostile appeared from the smoke. Rowan fired 3 times, center mass. The hostile went down. A third tried to rush her from behind. Rowan spun, caught the barrel of his rifle with one hand, twisted it away from her body, and drove her sidearm under his chin. She pulled the trigger. The bunker fell silent except for the wind. Mason's ears were ringing, his lungs burned. His entire body felt like it had been run through a blender set to puree. He looked around. Bodies. Everywhere. Hostile corpses scattered across the shattered floor like discarded puppets. Blood pooled in the cracks, already freezing in the sub-zero air that poured through the breaches. "Status!" Cole barked, his voice raw. "Still breathing," Pierce said. He was leaning against the wall, one hand pressed to his side. When he pulled it away, Mason saw blood. "Chief's hit," Ortiz said, already moving. "Everyone else?" "I'm good," Brenner said, though his voice was shaking so badly the words barely held together. "Mason?" Cole asked. "Here," Mason managed. I'm okay." Cole nodded, then turned to Rowan. "Captain?" Rowan stood in the center of the carnage, her sidearm still raised, her breathing steady. She lowered the weapon slowly, ejected the magazine, checked the rounds, and reloaded with mechanical precision. 11 hostiles down, she said. Her voice was flat, emotionless, like she'd just finished counting inventory instead of ending lives. "But they'll send more." "How many more?" Cole asked. Rowan's eyes swept the room, cataloging the damage, the casualties, the tactical situation. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, harder. "All of them." Ortiz worked on Pierce with steady hands and a medic's calm, peeling back the chief's gear to expose the wound. It was a graze, nasty, bleeding, but not fatal. The round had carved a furrow across his ribs without punching through. "You're lucky," Ortiz said, packing the wound with gauze. "Don't feel lucky," Pierce grunted. He looked at Rowan. "That was some of the finest shooting I've ever seen. Where the hell did you learn to move like that?" Rowan didn't answer. She was already at the breach in the floor, staring down into the tunnel the hostiles had used to infiltrate. Cole joined her, his rifle raised, covering the dark. "They dug under us. Had to have taken days, maybe weeks." "They've been planning this," Rowan said. "Watching us. Waiting for the storm." "Why?" Mason asked. He was still sitting against the wall, his rifle across his lap, trying to make sense of the chaos. "Why go through all this trouble for one outpost? We're nobody. We don't have anything worth dying for." Rowan turned to look at him, and for the first time since he'd met her, Mason saw something in her eyes that wasn't cold calculation. It was pity. "You're wrong," Rowan said quietly. "You have exactly what they want." "What's that?" Mason asked. "A location. Rowan said. A foothold, a staging ground. She turned back to the breach. This outpost sits on the only viable approach to 3 major installations within 50 clicks. If they take it, they control the high ground. They control the passes. They control everything. Cole swore under his breath. Command knew. That's why they sent you. Command suspected, Rowan corrected. Now we know. So what do we do? Brenner asked. We can't hold this position. The roof's gone. The floor's compromised. We're sitting ducks. Then we move, Rowan said. Move where? Cole demanded. We're surrounded. The storm's still raging. We've got no comms, no extraction, and 1 wounded operator. We move up, Rowan said. She pointed toward the ceiling, or what was left of it. To the ridge. Higher ground. Better visibility. Defensible position. That ridge is exposed, Pierce said through gritted teeth. We'll freeze before dawn. We'll freeze here too, Rowan said. At least up there. We can see them coming. Cole stared at her for a long moment, then he nodded. All right, we go up. Brenner, grab what ammo you can carry. Ortiz, stabilize the chief and prep him to move. Mason, I'll help, Mason said, already on his feet. Cole's expression softened, just a fraction. Good man. The team moved with grim efficiency, gathering what they could from the wreckage. Ammunition, medical supplies, thermal gear, anything that would keep them alive for another few hours. The wind howled through the breaches, turning the bunker into a wind tunnel, stealing what little warmth remained. Mason helped Ortiz get Pierce to his feet. The chief was pale but steady, his jaw set in a hard line. I can walk, he said. You better, Ortiz said. Because I'm not carrying you. Rowan moved to the door, checked the exterior, and looked back at the team. We move fast. Stay tight. Don't stop for anything. Once we're on the ridge, we dig in and hold until dawn. And if they hit us before then? Brenner asked. Rowan's eyes were cold. Then we make them regret it. She opened the door. The storm swallowed them whole. The climb to the ridge was hell. The wind was a living thing, clawing at their gear, trying to rip them off the mountain and hurl them into the void. The snow was waist-deep in places, forcing them to wade through it like they were crossing a frozen ocean. Every step was a battle. Every breath was agony. Mason stayed close to Pierce, one hand gripping the chief's gear, helping him stay upright when the wind hit too hard. Ortiz was on the other side, his face set in a mask of concentration. Ahead, Rowan led the way with Cole at her side. She moved through the storm like she'd been born in it, her steps sure, her path unerring. She didn't slow down, didn't look back. Brenner brought up the rear, his rifle slung, his hands gripping the rope they'd strung between them to keep from getting separated. 20 meters, 30, 50. Mason's legs were numb, his lungs burned, his vision narrowed to the back of the person in front of him, everything else erased by the whiteout. And then finally they reached the ridge. It was exactly what Rowan had promised, a rocky outcrop that jutted from the mountainside like a clenched fist. There was some shelter here, a natural wall of stone that blocked the worst of the wind. Not much, but enough. The team collapsed into the lee of the rocks, gasping, shaking, trying to force warmth back into their frozen limbs. Defensive positions, Cole said, his voice hoarse. Overlapping fields of fire. Brenner, set up what's left of the sensors. Mason, help me build a barricade. Mason nodded, too exhausted to speak. He grabbed chunks of ice and stone, stacking them into a crude wall that would provide some cover. It wasn't much, but it was something. Rowan climbed to the highest point of the ridge and stood there, silhouetted against the storm, her rifle in her hands. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just watched, waiting. The attack came an hour before dawn. They appeared like shadows rising from the snow itself, 15, maybe 20 hostiles, moving in a coordinated assault from 3 sides. They'd learned from their mistakes. This time, they didn't bunch up, didn't give easy targets. They came smart, fast, lethal. Contact! Rowan's voice cut through the wind. All sides, converging on our position. Light them up, Cole roared. The ridge erupted in gunfire. Mason fired into the advancing shapes, his rifle kicking against his shoulder, shell casings arcing into the snow. He didn't think, didn't aim carefully. He just pointed and pulled the trigger, over and over, pouring rounds downrange in a desperate attempt to stem the tide. Beside him, Pierce was firing one-handed, his other arm pressed against his wounded side. Ortiz had his rifle up, his shots measured and precise. Brenner was screaming something, orders, curses, prayers Mason couldn't tell, and firing in controlled bursts. And Rowan? Rowan was everywhere. She moved along the ridge like a wraith, appearing at weak points, shoring up the defense, killing with mechanical efficiency. Her rifle cracked in steady rhythm, crack, 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 and each shot dropped a hostile. But there were too many. For every one they killed, two more appeared. The hostiles pressed forward, using the terrain, using the storm, using their numbers. They were inside 50 meters now, then 40, then 30. "We can't hold," Brenner screamed. "There's too many." "We hold," Cole shouted back. "We hold or we die." A hostile broke through the line, sprinting toward their position with a knife in one hand and a grenade in the other. Mason swung his rifle around, fired, missed. The hostile was too close, too fast. Rowan intercepted him. She didn't shoot. She closed the distance, caught his knife hand, twisted it back until the bones broke with an audible crack, and drove her own blade into his throat. The grenade tumbled from his grip. Rowan kicked it away. It detonated midair, 20 meters out, the blast sending a spray of snow and shrapnel into the sky. Mason stared at her, his breath caught in his chest. She'd just saved his life, again. "Focus!" Rowan snapped at him. "They're not done!" Mason forced himself back to his rifle, back to the fight, back to the desperate struggle to stay alive for one more second, one more minute, one more... The sound of rotors cut through the storm. At first, Mason thought he was hallucinating. It was too perfect, too much like salvation to be real. But the sound grew louder, closer, and then, breaking through the clouds like an angel descending from heaven, came the helicopter. "Extraction!" Cole screamed. "Extraction inbound! Hold the line!" The hostiles heard it too. They surged forward in one final desperate push, trying to overrun the ridge before the helicopter could land. The team poured fire into them, cutting them down, holding the line by sheer force of will and ammunition. The helicopter touched down 50 meters below the ridge, its rotors whipping the snow into a blinding vortex. The side door slid open, and a crew chief waved frantically. "Go!" Cole shouted. "Brenner, Ortiz, get the chief down there. Mason, cover them." They moved. Mason fired covering bursts as the others scrambled down the slope toward the helicopter. Pierce stumbled, nearly fell, but Ortiz caught him, hauled him upright, dragged him the last few meters. "Mason, fall back," Cole ordered. Mason didn't need to be told twice. He turned and ran, his legs churning through the snow, his lungs screaming, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst. Behind him, Cole and Rowan held the ridge alone, two operators against what was left of an entire assault force. Mason reached the helicopter, hands grabbing him, pulling him inside. He spun around, watching the ridge, watching them. Cole was already moving, bounding down the slope in controlled retreat, firing as he went. But Rowan stayed. She stood at the highest point, her rifle raised, her silhouette dark against the lightning sky. "Come on," Mason screamed. "Get down here!" Rowan fired one last shot, then she turned and ran. She hit the slope at a full sprint, the hostiles right behind her, closing fast. Rounds kicked up snow at her feet, her sides, her head. She didn't slow down, didn't look back. She dove into the helicopter just as the pilot pulled pitch. The aircraft surged upward, and the hostiles broke. They scattered, disappearing back into the storm like they'd never existed. Mason slumped against the bulkhead, his rifle falling from his nerveless fingers. His entire body was shaking, his vision swam. He wanted to laugh, wanted to cry, wanted to do anything but sit here and feel the weight of what they'd just survived. Across from him, Rowan sat with her head tilted back, her eyes closed, her breathing steady. She looked like she'd just finished a light jog. Pierce caught Mason's eye and shook his head slowly, a grim smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Now you know," the chief said quietly, his voice barely audible over the rotors. "Now you know what it takes." Mason looked at Rowan, really looked at her, and understood. The legend wasn't built on stories. It was built on nights like this, on impossible odds and colder blood, and the kind of calm that only came when death was an old, familiar friend. The helicopter banked hard, pulling away from the ridge, from the outpost, from the storm. And for the first time in 12 hours, Mason let himself believe they might actually survive. The helicopter's interior smelled like jet fuel, blood, and survival. Mason sat wedged between Brenner and Ortiz, his back pressed against the cold metal bulkhead, his rifle clutched between his knees like a lifeline he couldn't quite let go of. The rotors thrummed overhead in a constant rhythm that vibrated through his bones, drowning out thought, drowning out everything except the simple animal knowledge that he was still breathing, still alive. Across from him, Pierce sat with his head tilted back, eyes closed, one hand pressed against the bandage Ortiz had wrapped around his ribs. The chief's face was gray, slick with sweat despite the cold, but his breathing was steady, controlled. The breathing of a man who'd been hurt worse and lived to tell about it. Cole was up front with the pilot, his hands braced against the bulkhead, talking into a headset with sharp, clipped words Mason couldn't hear over the engine noise. The lieutenant's profile was hard, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on something in the distance that might have been the horizon or might have been nothing at all. And Rowan sat by the door, one hand gripping the overhead strap, the other resting on her rifle. She hadn't moved since they'd lifted off, hadn't spoken, hadn't even opened her eyes. She just sat there, perfectly still, her face tilted toward the vibration of the rotors like she was listening to music only she could hear. Mason watched her. He couldn't help it. She'd saved his life. Saved all their lives. Multiple times. She'd held a ridge in sub-zero temperatures for over an hour, killed 11 hostiles with precision that bordered on supernatural, walked into a close-quarters firefight like she was strolling through a park, and extracted under fire without breaking stride. And now she sat there like it was just another Tuesday. Mason wanted to say something, wanted to thank her, to acknowledge what she'd done, to bridge the gap between the legend and the woman. But every time he opened his mouth, the words died in his throat. What could he possibly say that would matter? The helicopter banked hard, and Mason's stomach lurched. Through the small window, he caught a glimpse of the mountains falling away below them, jagged peaks wrapped in cloud, the storm still raging over the ridge they'd just abandoned, the outpost buried somewhere beneath 6 feet of snow and a dozen corpses. They'd left it all behind. But Mason knew, with a certainty that made his chest tighten, that none of them would ever really leave that bunker, that firefight, that night. It would follow them. It always did. The helicopter touched down at Forward Operating Base Sentinel 40 minutes later, the skids hitting the tarmac with a jolt that sent a fresh wave of pain through Mason's battered body. The side door slid open, and the world rushed in, cold air, shouting voices, the organized chaos of a military installation on high alert. Medics swarmed the aircraft before the rotors even stopped spinning. "Wounded first," someone shouted. "Get the chief to trauma! Move, move, move!" Hands grabbed Pierce, lifting him onto a stretcher with practiced efficiency. The chief tried to wave them off, but Ortiz was already there, moving with the medics, rattling off vitals and treatment in rapid-fire medical shorthand. "The rest of you out. Debrief in 30. Let's go." Mason climbed out of the helicopter on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. His boots hit solid ground, and for a moment he just stood there, swaying slightly, trying to convince his brain that he wasn't about to get shot at. Brenner stumbled past him, his face pale, his eyes 1,000-yard stare empty. A medic tried to guide him toward the medical tent, but Brenner shook him off with a muttered curse and kept walking, his hands shaking so badly he had to shove them into his pockets. Cole jumped down from the cockpit, his expression grim. He scanned the team, did a quick head count, then nodded once. "Good. Everyone's still breathing. That's more than I expected." He turned to the nearest officer, a major with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that came from too many deployments. "Sir, we need to talk. Now." "Debrief room, 10 minutes, the major said. "Get your people warm first. They look like frozen corpses." "Some of us feel like it too," Brenner muttered. Mason followed the flow of bodies toward the main structure, a low-slung building of concrete and corrugated steel that looked like it had been dropped onto the mountainside by a careless giant. The interior was warm, almost too warm after the past 12 hours, and the sudden shift in temperature made Mason's skin prickle and burn. Someone handed him a cup of coffee. He took it without thinking, wrapped his hands around the warmth, and tried to remember how to drink like a normal human being instead of a shell-shocked survivor. Across the room, Rowan stood alone near the wall, her gear still on, her rifle still slung across her back. She hadn't accepted coffee, hadn't sat down. She just stood there, watching the organized chaos with those cold gray eyes, her expression unreadable. An officer approached her, a colonel by the insignia, and said something Mason couldn't hear. Rowan nodded once, her face never changing, and followed the colonel out of the room. "Where's she going?" Mason asked. Cole looked up from his own coffee, his expression hard. "Wherever they tell her to go. She's not like us, Mason. She doesn't answer to the same chain of command." "What does that mean?" "It means she's on loan," Cole said quietly. "From somewhere else. Somewhere with enough pull to drop her into a backwater outpost without explanation and pull her out just as fast." He paused, then added, "And it means we're probably never going to see her again." Mason felt something twist in his chest. "That's it? She saves our lives and we just... what? Never know who she really is?" "That's how it works with people like her," Cole said. "Ghosts don't stick around for the credits." The debrief room was small, windowless, and smelled like stale air and too many previous briefings. A table dominated the center, surrounded by chairs that had seen better days. A single overhead light cast harsh shadows across everything, making the whole space feel like an interrogation room, which, Mason realized as he sat down, was probably the point. The major from the landing pad, Major Harding, according to the nameplate on his uniform, sat at the head of the table with a laptop open in front of him and a recorder blinking red. Cole sat to his right. Brenner and Mason sat across from each other, with Ortiz sliding in a few minutes later, fresh from the medical tent. "Chief stable," Ortiz said as he sat. "They're prepping him for surgery to clean the wound, but he'll be fine. Grumpy as hell, but fine." Harding nodded. "Good. We'll need his statement later." He looked around the table, his expression grave. "Gentlemen, what happened at Viper 7 is going to have repercussions all the way up the chain. I need to know everything. Start from the beginning. Lieutenant Cole, you have the floor." Cole straightened in his chair and began to talk. He laid it out in crisp military precision, their arrival at the outpost, the routine observation mission, the storm rolling in, the communication blackout. He described the radio warning, the first contact, Rowan's deployment to the ridge. Harding listened without interrupting, his fingers steepled under his chin, his eyes sharp. "And the assault on the bunker?" Harding asked when Cole paused. "Coordinated, professional. They breached from below and above simultaneously," Cole said. "Tunnel under the foundation, explosives on the roof. They knew our layout, knew our blind spots. This wasn't opportunistic. This was planned." "How many hostiles total?" "Best estimate, 25 to 30. We confirmed kills on at least 22. The rest broke when the helicopter arrived." Harding's eyebrows rose. 22 confirmed kills, 6 operators. He glanced at the laptop screen. "That's a hell of a ratio." "It would have been a massacre if Captain Vale hadn't been there," Cole said flatly. "Sir, with all due respect, I need to know. Who sent her, and why didn't we get a briefing?" Harding was silent for a long moment. Then he reached over and clicked the recorder off. The room went very, very quiet. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room," Harding said. "Understood?" A chorus of affirmatives. Harding leaned back in his chair, his expression weary. 3 weeks ago, intelligence flagged unusual activity in your sector. Communications intercepts, thermal signatures, movement patterns that didn't match civilian traffic or known military operations. We suspected a hostile force was setting up a staging area, but we didn't have confirmation. "So you sent Rowan to confirm it," Mason said. "Captain Vale," Harding corrected sharply. "Show some respect, Ensign." Mason flinched. "Yes, sir. Sorry, sir." Harding's expression softened slightly. "Captain Vale is part of a specialized unit, deep reconnaissance, high-value target elimination, the kind of operations that don't make it into official reports. When the intelligence came through, Command pulled her from another assignment and dropped her at Viper 7 with one objective: determine if the threat was real." "She did more than that," Cole said quietly. "She saved our lives." "Yes," Harding said. "She did. Which brings me to the uncomfortable part of this conversation. He looked around the table, his gaze settling on each of them in turn. The outpost is lost. The enemy knows we know about their presence. They're going to move, either to a new location or to accelerate their timeline. Either way, we've got a window of maybe 72 hours to respond before they disappear into the mountains and we're back to square one. Respond how? Brenner asked. That's above your pay grade, Harding said. What matters to you is that your involvement in this operation is over. You did your job. You survived. Now you go home, you write your reports, and you move on. Mason felt anger flare in his chest. That's it? We just walk away? Yes, Harding said. That's it. We lost the outpost. We barely made it out alive, and you're telling us to just forget about it? I'm telling you to do your job, Ensign, Harding said, his voice hardening. You're not a policymaker. You're not a strategist. You're a junior officer who got caught in the wrong place at the wrong time and lived to tell about it. Be grateful for that. Mason opened his mouth to argue, then felt Cole's hand on his arm. Stand down, Cole said quietly. Mason clenched his jaw, but he nodded. Harding's expression softened again. I know it's not satisfying. I know you want answers, closure, revenge, whatever you want to call it. But that's not how this works. You go home. You heal. You learn from this. And maybe, if you're smart, you take what Captain Vale showed you and you become better operators because of it. He stood, signaling the end of the debrief. Dismissed. Get some rest? You've earned it, was some. Mason found Rowan 2 hours later. She was standing outside the operations building, alone, staring out at the mountains. The storm had finally broken, leaving the sky clear and cold and impossibly bright. Snow blanketed everything, turning the world into a monochrome painting of black rock and white powder. She didn't turn when Mason approached, but he knew she'd heard him. People like Rowan always heard everything. Captain, Mason said quietly. Ensign, Rowan said. Her voice was flat, tired. Mason hesitated, then stepped up beside her. I wanted to thank you for everything. You didn't have to do what you did. You could have stayed in cover, could have let us handle it ourselves. But you didn't. Rowan was silent for a long moment. Then she said, You would have died. I know. All of you would have died. I know, Mason said again. He swallowed hard. That's why I'm thanking you. Rowan finally turned to look at him. Her eyes were still gray, still cold, but there was something else there now. Something that might have been exhaustion, or might have been something deeper. You did well out there, Rowan said. You didn't freeze, didn't panic. You made the shots that mattered. I learned from the best, Mason said. Rowan's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. You made mistakes, she continued. Talked when you should have been listening. Questioned when you should have been following orders. Let your nerves make you sloppy. I know, Mason said, his face heating. But you learned, Rowan said. That's what matters. Most people don't learn. They just die. Mason didn't know what to say to that. Rowan looked back at the mountains. Fear is good, Ensign. Fear keeps you sharp, keeps you alive. But fear also makes people stupid, makes them hesitate, makes them second guess. You want to survive? You learn to use the fear without letting it use you. Is that what you do? Mason asked. Rowan didn't answer for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter, softer, almost human. I don't feel fear anymore, she said. I burned it out a long time ago. In places you'll never see, doing things you'll never have to do. She paused. Don't be like me, Mason. Don't let the work hollow you out until there's nothing left but the mission. Stay afraid. Stay human. Stay someone worth saving. Mason felt his throat tighten. I don't understand. You will, Rowan said. Someday, when you've been doing this long enough. She turned to face him fully. They're sending me out again. Another assignment, another mountain, another night where the odds are bad and the mission is worse. Can I ask where? No. Can I ask why? Rowan almost smiled again. Because someone has to, and I'm good at it. Mason nodded slowly. Will I see you again? Probably not, Rowan said. She held out her hand. Mason took it. Her grip was firm, her hand cold. Stay sharp, Ensign, Rowan said, and stay alive. You too, Captain. Rowan let go, shouldered her pack, and walked toward the waiting helicopter on the far side of the base. She didn't look back, didn't wave. She just walked, her silhouette growing smaller against the snow until she disappeared into the bird. The rotor spun up. The helicopter lifted off. And just like that, she was gone. 3 weeks later, Mason stood in front of a classroom full of recruits at the Naval Special Warfare Training Facility in Virginia. The room was warm, bright, filled with eager faces and hands itching to take notes. He'd been asked to give a guest lecture, share his experience, talk about real-world operations versus training scenarios. Mason cleared his throat and looked out at the sea of young, confident faces staring back at him. "Let me tell you about the night I learned the difference between confidence and competence," he began. He told them about the storm, about the outpost, about the rookies who thought they knew everything and the veterans who knew better. He told them about the silence before the assault, the chaos of the breaches, the desperate fight on the ridge. And he told them about Rowan. Not her name, not her unit, just the lessons she'd taught him in the span of 12 hours. How to breathe when the world was ending, how to shoot when your hands were shaking, how to lead when everyone was looking to you for answers you didn't have, how to survive when survival seemed impossible. When he finished, the room was silent. Then one recruit raised his hand. "Did you ever see her again, sir?" Mason shook his head. "No, but I didn't need to. She taught me everything I needed to know in one night." "What was the most important lesson, sir?" Mason thought about it. Thought about Rowan standing on that ridge, her rifle raised, her silhouette dark against the storm. Thought about the calm in her voice, the precision of her movements, the cold, relentless focus that had kept them all alive. "The most important lesson," Mason said quietly, "is that real strength isn't loud. It doesn't brag. It doesn't need recognition. Real strength is the calm hand that holds the line when everyone else is shaking. The steady voice that cuts through the chaos. The person who does what needs to be done, even when it's impossible, even when no one's watching." He paused. "That's the kind of operator you need to become. Not the loudest, not the flashiest. The one who stands when everyone else falls." The recruits nodded, scribbling notes, their faces serious. Mason dismissed them and walked out into the Virginia afternoon, the sun warm on his face, the air smelling like cut grass and normalcy. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his messages. There, buried under a dozen unread texts, was one from an unknown number. It had come through 2 days ago. It was short, just 4 words. "You're doing good, Ensign." No signature, no explanation. But Mason knew. He smiled, pocketed the phone, and kept walking. Somewhere out there, in some frozen corner of the world, Rowan Vale was standing on another ridge, holding another line, saving another group of soldiers who didn't know how lucky they were. And maybe, just maybe, teaching them the same lesson she'd taught him, that legends weren't born. They were forged. One impossible night at a time. 6 months had passed since the storm. 6 months since Mason had stood on that frozen ridge and learned what it meant to survive something that should have killed him. 6 months since he'd watched Rowan Vale disappear into a helicopter and out of his life, like smoke dissolving into clear air. The world had kept turning. Mason had written his report, sat through 3 more debriefs, and spent 2 weeks on mandatory leave that felt more like purgatory than rest. He'd tried to go home, tried to be normal, tried to pretend that nothing had changed. But everything had changed. He saw it in the mirror every morning, the way his eyes had gone a little harder, a little older, like someone had reached inside and aged him 5 years in a single night. He felt it in the way he moved through crowds, always scanning exits, always calculating distances, always aware of who was behind him and what their hands were doing. He heard it in the silence between words when people asked him how he was doing, and he said fine, because the truth that he still woke up at 0300 hearing wind scream and rifle shots crack wasn't something civilians could understand. Brenner had requested a transfer to a desk job. Last Mason heard, he was pushing papers at a logistics command in San Diego, safe and far from anything that could shoot back. Ortiz had gone back to his unit, business as usual, though Mason had caught him staring off into nothing during their last conversation, his hands unconsciously checking for a medkit that wasn't there. Pierce had recovered, gotten his medal, and promptly retired. 30 years of service, he'd said. Time to let the young ones carry the weight. Cole had been promoted. Lieutenant commander now, running training operations out of Little Creek. He'd reached out to Mason once, asked if he wanted to come work with him, help train the next generation. Mason had said yes, because the only thing worse than remembering that night was the thought of someone else going through it unprepared. The sun was setting over the training facility when Mason pulled into the parking lot, the Virginia sky bleeding orange and purple through the trees. He grabbed his bag from the passenger seat, his old pack, still stained with snow melt and gun oil he couldn't quite scrub out, and headed toward the operations building. Cole was waiting inside, leaning against a desk with his arms crossed and the kind of smile that said he knew something Mason didn't. "You're late," Cole said. "Traffic," Mason lied. "Right, traffic." Cole pushed off the desk. "Come on, there's someone I want you to meet." Mason followed him down the corridor, past classrooms and briefing rooms, and the organized chaos of a facility that never really slept. They stopped at a door marked Conference Room B. Cole opened it, and Mason's heart stopped. Rowan Vale sat at the conference table. She looked exactly the same, lean, compact, gray eyes sharp as surgical steel. She wore civilian clothes now, dark jeans and a plain black jacket, but the way she sat was unmistakable, relaxed, alert, ready to move in any direction at any second. "Ensign Reed," Rowan said. Her voice was the same too, flat, controlled, empty of everything except recognition. "Captain Vale," Mason managed. His mouth was dry. I didn't know you were—" "Sit down, Mason," Cole said, gesturing to a chair. "We've got a lot to talk about." Mason sat, his mind racing. Rowan was here. After 6 months of silence, of wondering if she was even still alive, she was sitting 3 feet away from him like she'd never left. Cole took the seat at the head of the table. "I'm going to cut to the chase. Captain Vale has accepted a new assignment, an instructor position. Here." Mason blinked. "Here? You mean—" "I mean she's going to be training operators," Cole said, "teaching them what she knows, making sure the next generation doesn't make the same mistakes we did." Mason looked at Rowan. She was watching him with that same unreadable expression, her hands folded on the table in front of her. "Why?" Mason asked quietly. Rowan was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Because I'm tired of watching people die for lessons they should have learned in training." The words hung in the air, heavy with weight Mason couldn't quite parse. "The brass pushed for this," Cole added. "After what happened at Viper 7, after the reports came in, they realized they had a problem. We're sending operators into the field who are technically proficient but tactically naive. They know how to shoot, they don't know how to survive." "So they want me to fix that," Rowan said. There was no pride in her voice, no satisfaction, just fact. "And they want you to help," Cole said, looking at Mason. "You've got field experience now, real experience, the kind that matters. You've been on the other side of what we teach. You know what works and what's just theory." Mason's head was spinning. Ed was, "You want me to—" "What? Co-teach?" "I want you to be the voice of the people in the room," Cole said. "The ones who are scared. The ones who think they're ready but aren't. The ones who need someone to look them in the eye and tell them the truth before they get themselves killed." Mason looked at Rowan. "And you're okay with this?" Rowan's expression didn't change. "I don't care who helps. I care that it works." "That's a yes," Cole said with a slight smile. "Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. It's going to be hard. You're going to relive that night over and over every time you step into a classroom. You're going to see yourself in every cocky recruit who thinks they're invincible. And you're going to have to watch some of them fail despite everything you do. But you'll also save lives," Rowan said quietly. "The ones who listen, the ones who learn. You'll send them out there with a better chance of coming home." So Mason thought about the recruits from his lecture 3 months ago, thought about their eager faces, their notebooks, their questions, thought about how many of them would end up on a ridge somewhere, surrounded, outgunned, staring death in the face, and thought about how many of them might survive if someone taught them right. "When do we start?" Mason asked. Cole grinned. "Tomorrow, 600. Don't be late." The first class was brutal. 20 recruits, fresh out of basic, all fire and confidence and the kind of arrogance that came from never having been truly tested. They swaggered into the classroom like they owned it, talking loud, laughing louder, treating the whole thing like a formality before they got to the real action. Mason stood at the front of the room next to Rowan and watched them settle into their seats. And he saw himself 6 months ago, the loud one in the back who wouldn't shut up, the nervous one near the door who kept checking his watch, the quiet one in the corner who was too afraid to ask questions. They were all there, every version of the person he used to be. Rowan didn't waste time with pleasantries. "My name is Captain Rowan Vale," she said, her voice cutting through the chatter like a blade. "This is Lieutenant Junior Grade Mason Reed. For the next 8 weeks, we own you. Your training up to this point has been designed to make you competent. Our job is to make you survive." The room went quiet. "Some of you are going to wash out," Rowan continued. "Some of you are going to realize this isn't what you thought it was and quit. And some of you, a very small percentage, are going to make it through and become operators who are actually worth the gear you carry." One recruit in the back raised his hand. He had the same cocky smirk Mason remembered wearing. "Ma'am, with all due respect, we've already been through hell. We know what we're doing." Rowan stared at him, just stared. The silence stretched until the recruit started to squirm. "What's your name?" Rowan asked. "Petty Officer Harris, ma'am." "Harris, you don't know shit," Rowan said flatly. "You know drills, you know scenarios, you know controlled environments where the enemy follows a script and nobody actually dies. That's not real. That's not combat. That's theater." Harris's smirk faded. "Lieutenant Reed," Rowan said without looking away from Harris. "Tell them." Mason stepped forward. His heart was pounding, but his voice was steady. "6 months ago, I was sitting where you are," Mason said. "I'd finished top of my class. I could field strip a rifle blindfolded. I could run the obstacle course in record time. I thought I was ready." He paused, meeting the eyes of each recruit in turn. "Then they dropped me in a bunker in the middle of a blizzard with 5 other operators and told us to hold the line. And in the span of 12 hours, I learned that everything I thought I knew was useless. Because when the shooting starts, when the bodies start dropping, when you're down to your last magazine and the enemy is still coming, that's when you find out who you really are." The room was dead silent now. "I made mistakes that should have gotten me killed," Mason continued. "I hesitated when I should have acted. I panicked when I should have stayed calm. I second-guessed when I should have trusted my training. The only reason I'm standing here is because someone better than me was in that bunker. Someone who'd been through worse and survived. Someone who showed me what it actually takes." He glanced at Rowan. She gave him the smallest nod. "We're not here to break you," Mason said. "We're here to prepare you, to show you what real combat looks like, to teach you how to stay alive when everything goes wrong. And if you're smart, if you're willing to admit you don't know everything, you might just make it." When he finished, the room stayed quiet. Then Harris raised his hand again. This time, there was no smirk. "How do we start, sir?" Mason almost smiled. "By shutting up and listening." The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of Mason's life. He and Rowan ran the recruits through scenarios designed to break them. Night operations in sub-zero temperatures, close-quarters combat with limited ammunition, ambush drills where the enemy had every advantage. They didn't just teach tactics, they taught mindset. How to control breathing when adrenaline wanted to take over. How to make decisions when there was no good option. How to lead when everyone was looking to you for answers you didn't have. How to keep going when your body wanted to quit. And how to live with the weight of what you'd done when the shooting stopped. Rowan was relentless. She pushed them harder than any instructor they'd ever had, demanded more, accepted less. She didn't coddle, didn't sugarcoat, didn't pretend that nice words would save their lives. But she was fair, and she was brilliant. Mason watched her work and understood why command had pushed for this. Rowan didn't just know how to survive, she knew how to teach it, how to break down impossible situations into manageable pieces. How to show someone the difference between panic and focus with nothing but a look and a few well-chosen words. And slowly, impossibly, the recruits started to change. The cocky ones learned humility. The nervous ones found confidence. The quiet ones discovered their voice. By week 6, they were starting to look like operators. By week 8, They were ready. The final exercise was simple on paper. Hold a defensive position against a superior force for 6 hours. In practice, it was hell. Mason and Rowan had designed it to replicate Viper 7 as closely as possible. Limited resources, no backup, no easy answers, just a fortified position, a countdown clock, and an enemy force that would not stop coming. The recruits looked scared when they got their briefing. Good. Fear kept you sharp. Mason stood on the observation platform overlooking the training ground with Rowan beside him. Below, the recruits scrambled to set up their defenses, arguing, planning, second-guessing. Think they'll make it? Mason asked. Some of them, Rowan said. Not all. Which ones? Rowan was quiet for a moment, watching. The ones who remember that survival isn't about being the best. It's about being smart enough to know when to trust the person next to you. Mason nodded slowly. The exercise began. It was chaos. Beautiful, terrible chaos. The recruits made mistakes, plenty of them, but they adapted. They learned. They covered each other, communicated, held the line when it would have been easier to break. And when the 6 hours were up and the simulation ended, 17 of the 20 recruits were still standing. Mason found Harris afterward, slumped against a wall, his face streaked with sweat and exhaustion. How do you feel? Mason asked. Harris looked up at him, his eyes hollow. Like I just survived something I shouldn't have. Good, Mason said. That means you learned. Harris managed a weak smile. Thank you, sir. For not letting us stay stupid. Mason clapped him on the shoulder. Pass it on. When you're out there for real, when some rookie is running their mouth and doesn't know what they're facing, you be the person who shows them. Yes, sir. 3 months later, Mason stood in Cole's office with a folder in his hand and a decision weighing on his chest. They want me to deploy again, Mason said quietly. New unit, new mission, back to the field. Cole leaned back in his chair. And I don't know if I should take it. Why not? Mason gestured toward the window, toward the training facility beyond. Because this matters, what we're doing here, teaching them, making sure they don't die for stupid reasons. It does matter, Cole agreed, but so does being out there, leading them, showing them it can be done. I can't do both. No, Cole said. You can't. He paused. So what do you want, Mason? Really want? Mason thought about it. Thought about the ridge, the storm, the weight of the rifle in his hands, and the sound of Rowan's voice cutting through the chaos. Thought about the recruits, about Harris, about all the others who'd come through and learned and survived because someone took the time to teach them right. I want to stay, Mason said. I want to keep doing this, keep teaching, keep making a difference here. Cole nodded slowly. Then stay. The field will always need operators, but good instructors? Those are rare. Mason set the folder on the desk. I'm staying. Good choice, Cole said. Then he smiled. You know Rowan said the same thing, right? When they offered her deployment. She turned it down, said she was done running toward bullets and ready to make sure others didn't have to. Mason felt something warm settle in his chest. She said that? In her own way, Cole said, which means she grunted and walked out of the room. Mason laughed. It felt good. Felt human. Damn. He found Rowan that evening on the observation deck, watching the sun set over the training grounds. She stood with her hands in her pockets, her profile silhouetted against the orange sky. Mason walked up beside her. They stood in silence for a while, just watching the light fade. Cole told me you're staying, Rowan said finally. Yeah, Mason said. Seemed like the right choice. It is. You sure? I mean, I'm not exactly... You're exactly what they need, Rowan said, cutting him off. You remember what it's like to be them, to be scared and stupid and convinced you're ready when you're not. I can teach them tactics. You can teach them humanity. Mason looked at her. Is that what you lost? Out there? Rowan was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. I don't know, she said. Maybe. Or maybe I just buried it so deep I forgot where I put it. She turned to face him. But being here, teaching them, I feel like I'm finding pieces of it again, small pieces. But pieces. Mason nodded. Then we'll keep finding them. Together. Rowan almost smiled. Together. They stood there as the sun disappeared below the horizon, leaving the sky painted in shades of purple and gray. Below them, recruits moved across the training ground, preparing for tomorrow's drills, laughing, arguing, living. And Mason realized something that made his chest tighten with emotion he couldn't quite name. They weren't just teaching tactics and survival. They were teaching hope. The hope that you could face the worst the world had to offer and still come out the other side. The hope that you didn't have to carry the weight alone. The hope that someone who'd been through hell and survived could reach back and pull you through too. But 5 years later, Mason stood at a memorial service in the mountains. Not for someone who died. For something that had ended. The old Viper 7 site had been decommissioned, buried properly, marked with a simple stone that bore no names but held all the weight of that terrible night. Pierce was there, older now, grayer, but still solid as granite. Ortiz stood beside him, steady and calm as ever. Brenner had even flown in from California, his eyes clearer than they'd been in years. Cole stood at the front, reading names of operators who'd served at mountain outposts over the years, honoring the tradition of holding the line in impossible places. And Rowan stood apart from the group, her eyes fixed on the stone, her expression unreadable. When the ceremony ended, people drifted away in small clusters, talking quietly, sharing old stories, finding comfort in the shared memory of survival. Mason walked over to Rowan. "You okay?" he asked. Rowan nodded slowly. "I used to come back to places like this and feel nothing, just empty, like I'd left pieces of myself behind and couldn't get them back. And now?" Rowan looked at him. "Now I feel like I did something that mattered, not just surviving, but making sure others could too." Mason smiled. "You did. You saved a lot of lives, Rowan, more than you'll ever know." "We did," Rowan corrected. "All of us." They stood together in silence, watching the wind move through the trees, carrying snow that sparkled in the afternoon light. Then Rowan held out her hand. Mason took it. "Thank you," Rowan said quietly, "for reminding me there's more to this than just the fight." "Thank you," Mason said, "for showing me what real strength looks like." They let go, and Rowan turned to walk back toward the others. But before she reached them, she stopped and looked back. "Hey, Mason?" "Yeah?" "You were right, back at the bunker, when you tried to apologize." Mason blinked. "About what?" Rowan's expression softened, just for a moment, just enough. "You did need your focus, but you also needed to know that fear isn't weakness, it's human, and being human is what makes you worth fighting for." She walked away before Mason could respond, leaving him standing there with a tightness in his throat and a warmth in his chest that felt like redemption. Years passed. The training program that Mason and Rowan built became legendary in its own right. Operators who graduated from it carried a reputation for being unbreakable under pressure, calm in chaos, and willing to stand when others fell. They called it the Wraith Protocol. Not because Rowan asked them to, she never would have, but because the operators who survived it understood that they'd been taught by someone who'd walked through hell and decided that the only thing worth doing with that experience was making sure others didn't have to walk it alone. Mason eventually made captain, led his own units, saw action in places whose names would never appear in official reports. But he always came back to the training facility, always made time to teach, always remembered the lesson he'd learned in a bunker during a blizzard 6 months into his career. That real strength isn't about being fearless. It's about standing firm when fear wants to break you. It's about protecting the person next to you even when you're terrified. It's about learning from the ones who came before and passing that knowledge to the ones who come after. It's about being the calm voice in the chaos, the steady hand in the storm, the one who holds the line when everyone else is shaking. And on quiet nights, when the weight of command felt too heavy and the ghosts of old missions came knocking, Mason would pull out his phone and scroll to that old message. "You're doing good, Ensign." It still made him smile, because somewhere out there, whether in a classroom, on a ridge, or in the heart of every operator who'd learned what it meant to truly survive, Rowan Vale's legacy lived on. Not in medals or monuments, but in the lives saved by people who'd learned from the best and refused to let that knowledge die. Real strength isn't loud. It's the calm hand that holds the line when everyone else is shaking.